In the fall of 1985, I began dreaming of a temple. Not a temple from the myths I had spent my life studying, but something older, quieter, and yet entirely unknown. It never had the same shape twice. Sometimes it was made of stone, other times wood or glass that reflected no light. But what never changed was the feeling, as if this place had been waiting for me before I was born. Each night, the dream returned. I would find myself standing before a hidden doorway, carved into the side of a mountain that wasn't on any map. No signs, no path, only silence, and the hum of something ancient stirring beneath my ribs. Something inside me knew this wasn't just a dream. It was a summons. I told no one. After all, how could I explain to my peers, the scholars, the analysts, that the man who had lectured on hero myths and the monomyth now found himself called not by theory, but by mystery? And then one night, something changed. The door in the mountain opened. I stepped through and entered a space that defied reason. There were no walls, but I was enclosed. No ceiling, but I was contained. It was as if I had walked into the heartbeat of something holy and alive. And then a voice, not heard but felt, echoed across the silence. You speak of the hero's journey, but have you walked your own? I stood frozen. For a moment, I wasn't Joseph the scholar or Joseph the writer. I was something smaller, more honest, a seeker standing on the threshold of his own myth. The voice continued, you have taught others to find their path. Now it's your turn to walk blind. Then everything vanished. I woke up sweating. The world looked unchanged, but inside me, something had cracked open. I knew this dream wasn't done with me. It wasn't an illusion. It was an invitation. And somehow I knew, once I entered that temple fully, I would never come back the same. The next time I crossed the threshold in my dream, I wasn't prepared for what waited. There was no temple, no holy architecture, just a single wooden door standing in a field of fog, unattached to any wall, untouched by wind. Carved into it, almost like a whisper etched in time, was a symbol I recognized from old Celtic myth, a spiral, the mark of inner return. I hesitated. Then something, instinct or fate, moved me forward. As I touched the door, the fog pulled back and the world shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer in a dreamscape. I was in a dimly lit kitchen from the 1920s, the smell of boiled cabbage, the ticking of a clock too loud for comfort. I recognized this place before memory could name it. It was my childhood home. And there he was, a small boy, no older than 5, curled in the corner, clutching a book too heavy for his hands, silent, watching shadows on the wall like they might come alive. Me. I tried to speak, but no sound came. He didn't see me. Or maybe he couldn't. He was lost in a loneliness that books couldn't fix, abandoned not by people but by presence. The kind of abandonment that comes when adults are there but not with you. When they offer structure but not soul. He shivered. I wanted to reach out, to tell him he was seen, that one day he'd understand myth not as escape, but as map. But then the voice returned. You cannot rewrite the past, it said. Only witness it. And so I sat, in silence, beside him, watching the boy who would become me carry a weight no child should hold, the burden of making sense of the world alone. And as I watched, I wept, not from sorrow, but recognition. This was my first gate, not one of wisdom or power, but of truth. Because before a man can teach others to face their dragons, he must sit with the child inside him, quietly, patiently, until the child finally believes he is no longer alone. And in that moment, something shifted. The boy looked up, almost sensing me, not with his eyes, but with something deeper. And just like that, the door returned, ready for me to move on. The door closed behind me, and I found myself in another place entirely. This time, it was a vast lecture hall, eerily familiar. Wooden seats, chalkboard dust in the air, and my own voice echoing from the podium. But it wasn't me speaking now. It was a younger version of myself, sharp-eyed and composed, delivering a talk on mythic archetypes to an audience that didn't exist. I watched him, me, pacing confidently, weaving meaning into every sentence. The man on that stage was everything the world had come to expect of Joseph Campbell: composed, intellectual, untouchable. But something was wrong. He never blinked, never stumbled. And above all, he never paused long enough to feel. Then I noticed what lay beneath the podium: a mirror. And in the reflection, something was off. The man's face looked calm from the outside, but the reflection trembled, eyes wet, fists clenched so tightly that blood had drained from his knuckles. I turned to leave, but the voice returned. "You've crafted a perfect myth, Joseph, but what truth have you hidden inside it?" Suddenly the lights in the hall dimmed, and the mirror began to speak, not with sound but memory. Moments I had buried, the night I lost someone I loved but gave no eulogy, the time I was honored but felt empty, the tears I swallowed because men of intellect don't cry. And there it was, the myth I had unknowingly lived, the strong man, the wise teacher, the one above it all. I stepped closer to the mirror. My reflection stared back, not with judgment, but with exhaustion. All these years I had taught others to embrace the hero's call, to confront their shadow. Yet I had worn my knowledge like armor, impenetrable, polished, admired, and utterly isolating. The second gate was not about knowledge, it was about grief, and the courage it takes not to speak, but to feel. For the first time in decades, I let the tears fall, not from sadness, but from release, from finally giving myself permission to feel what the image of strength had denied me. And just like that, the lecture hall faded, the mirror cracked, and a new door appeared. This one made not of wood or stone, but of stillness, waiting for the next part of me to be revealed. The door creaked open, and this time there was no dreamscape, no memory, only black, thick, infinite. I stepped forward and the ground vanished beneath me. I wasn't falling. I was floating, suspended in a space without edges. For the first time on this journey, there was no story to hold on to, no myth to decode, just void. And then I saw it, a flicker, a candle burning alone on a small table in the distance. As I approached, the darkness didn't recede. It moved with me, like a veil that refused to lift. At the table sat a figure, hooded, silent, familiar. "Who are you?" I asked. It did not answer. Then I saw what lay on the table, a pocket watch, mine, the exact one I had carried for years, except now the hands were spinning, backward. The figure reached out, slowly, and touched the glass. Time stopped. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but with presence. "You have walked through memory, through sorrow, but you have not yet faced what all men flee from. Death, not the dramatic cinematic death, not the skeletal figure with a scythe, but something quieter, more honest. The unwritten chapter." It leaned in, and I saw beneath the hood my own eyes, older than they should be, tired, timeless. "You've taught that the hero dies to be reborn," it said, But what happens when the teacher fears his own ending? I swallowed hard. This wasn't about death as event. It was about death as disappearance. What if everything I had built, books, lectures, thoughts, simply faded when I did? What if my life was a whisper mistaken for a legacy? Then the candle flickered again, and I remembered something I once wrote but never fully lived. The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe. In this blackness, I could feel it. The beat, faint but steady, larger than me. And suddenly I knew. I wasn't being asked to defeat death. I was being asked to dissolve, to let go of the need to be remembered, and simply become part of what always remembers. The third gate was surrender. I looked back at the figure. It nodded. Then both it and the watch dissolved into light. The candle went out, and the next door opened, not forward, but downward, into silence deeper than thought. There was no door this time, only descent. I was falling, but not through space, through self, as if all the stories, identities, and symbols I had ever worn peeled away one by one, leaving me nothing. No scholar, no seeker, not even a man. I landed gently on what felt like cold marble, and for the first time since this journey began, there was nothing around me. No memory, no voice, no myth, just stillness. I sat, not by choice, but because there was nothing else to do, no direction, no instruction, just this echoing emptiness. And in that space, something terrifying began to rise. Not fear, but absence. The terrifying realization that everything I had ever known, built, believed, meant nothing here. Time did not exist. Meaning did not matter. Even truth, my lifelong obsession, had no foothold in this place. And then it hit me. This was the void every mystic had whispered of. The space between the old self and the new, the womb before rebirth. But unlike the myths I taught, there were no dragons here, only silence. And that silence held a mirror, not of who I was, but who I'd never dared to be. The man without titles, without legacy, without answers. For a moment I panicked, reached for thought, for explanation, but nothing held. So I did the only thing I hadn't tried. I surrendered. Not to death, not to fate, but to this moment, pure, undefined, eternal. And in that surrender, I felt it, a pulse. Faint at first, then steady. Not mine, the world's. I was no longer in the temple. I was the temple. And just like that, I understood. Before I could pass through the next door, I had to dissolve completely. Out of the stillness, it began. Not with light, but with breath. A slow inhale, not from my lungs, but from somewhere deeper. The kind of breath that doesn't keep you alive, but reminds you that you are. Then, the voice. You're not lost, it said. You're layered. I turned toward the sound. There was no form, no shape, just presence. Like the air had a soul and finally decided to speak. Who are you? I asked. I am everything you didn't want to be, it answered calmly. I am the part you left behind every time you put on a smile for the world. I am the rage behind your logic, the fear behind your theories, the grief under your wisdom. My chest tightened. You're the shadow? I'm not the enemy, it replied. I'm the rest of you. Then it showed me, not with images, but with knowing. I saw all the parts of myself I'd abandoned in the pursuit of becoming someone worthy. The boy who was too sensitive, the man who doubted himself but wore certainty like armor, the seeker who secretly feared the answers would never come. I taught about the shadow, I whispered, almost ashamed. But you never met yours, it said. You studied me, you named me, but you never sat with me. And so I did. I knelt, not in surrender, but in respect. Because for the first time I understood, this wasn't darkness as punishment. This was integration. The shadow didn't want to ruin me. It wanted to rejoin me. You feared becoming me, the voice said, but look what it cost you: connection, emotion, vulnerability. And what do I become if I let you in? Whole, it said simply, then silence. But this time, the silence felt warm, like something had been sewn back together. And in that warmth, I felt it. The temple again, not around me, but within me. Pillars made of memory, roofs built from forgiveness. A sanctuary not for gods, but for every disowned piece of myself finally returning home. The voice spoke once more. You can't teach what you haven't embodied. You can't guide others to their truth if you've abandoned your own. I nodded, not just in agreement, but in surrender. I was ready, not for answers, but for wholeness. And as the darkness faded, I realized I hadn't been traveling through a temple. I had been rebuilding one, brick by brick, within my soul. When I emerged, there were no trumpets, no grand revelations, only air, crisp, ordinary, real. I stood once more at the base of the mountain, the one from the dream's beginning. But now, there was no door, no temple, nothing at all. Just earth beneath my feet and a quiet I hadn't felt in years. I looked down at my hands. They were empty. No scrolls, no insights carved in stone, no sacred relics to bring back and present to the world. And yet, I felt full. For the first time in my life, I had nothing to prove, no lecture to deliver, no audience to impress, no theories to defend. I had walked through myself, and what I found was not another myth, but the silence underneath all myths. The truth that what we seek is never out there. It was never in the grail, the sword, the altar, or the hero's crown. It was always in the returning. Not returning to a place, but to a self we abandoned, trying to become someone else. I sat beneath a tree and let the wind pass through me. The world unchanged. And yet, I could hear it differently now. Not as noise, but as rhythm. Not as chaos, but as choreography. I hadn't brought back answers. I had brought back awareness. And that, I realized, was the true gift of the journey. Not knowledge to share, but presence to embody. I was no longer the teacher. I was the student again. And in that humility, I finally understood. To carry truth, one must be light enough to hold nothing and still feel whole. That night, I dreamed no more. For the first time in weeks, sleep was still. No visions, no doors, no voices calling me forward. But when I woke, I understood. The journey hadn't ended. It had simply returned to where it began. The classroom, the quiet morning tea, the open book. But everything now felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I no longer looked outside for meaning. I listened within. And there, in that inner stillness, I saw it clearly. The temple had never existed in space. It had always been a pattern of remembering, a path back to wholeness disguised as descent. And my dreams, they weren't fantasies. They were blueprints, guiding me not toward legacy, but toward integration. I once believed the hero's journey was about slaying dragons and returning with wisdom. Now I see the real hero is the one who learns to sit with his shadow, cradle his younger self, and walk empty-handed into the unknown, trusting that even silence has something sacred to say. I rose from bed and opened the window. The wind was just wind. The birds were just birds. And yet, everything felt holy. Because now I wasn't trying to become anything, I simply was.